Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Dana Buckler Show. My name is Dana, and I have to tell you, everyone listening around the world, that my guest today is somebody that I am extremely excited to introduce. I just want to basically set the stage here. So my guest today, Jordy Klein, him and I have a mutual friend. His name's Carl Allen, and maybe about a year ago, I was talking to him, and the subject of my favorite movie of all time, Jaws, came up. And he just nonchalantly says, "Hey, I've got a buddy who him and his father, they were involved in some of the Jaws movies." And I'm like, what are you talking about? How do I not get an opportunity to talk to this person? So I am excited and thrilled to welcome Jordy Klein to the Dana Buckler Show. Jordy, we got a lot to talk about, but first and foremost, it's a beautiful Sunday morning. How are you doing today?
Doing good, sir. Great to be invited on your show.
This is a big deal. I'm excited. So we've got, again, lots to talk about. Let's just take it from the top. All right. Let's talk a little bit about your story. And first, let's tell the listeners what you do for a living, how you got involved, and we'll just take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a cinematographer. I operate motion picture cameras for a living, have been pretty much my whole life. I was pretty much, well, when I started, it was film. So we used to have to load the film magazines in what's called a changing bag, where you put the unexposed film in the bag and you put the film magazine in, you put your hands in there and you thread the magazine and then take it out and put it on the camera. My dad used to take me as young as 3-4 years old, and I could load magazine. I could actually go in the changing bag and zip myself in and change the film inside. That's how small I was that I could fit in there. Probably couldn't do that anymore. But yeah, so I started going on different shoots with my dad, like even from first of all, my dad is a 2-time Academy Award winning cinematographer, and so I would go on shoots with him, everything from the Flipper TV series, Gentle Ben, James Bond movies that he filmed. So I kind of had an awesome childhood. I grew up meeting famous actors, and what's weird is I thought every kid did this, learned how to scuba dive when I was 2.5. Yeah, I had the coolest dad in the world as well. So, but yeah, and then I continued on that path. I went to school for a little while to be a mechanical engineer. Decided that was too boring because my dad owned a air compressor business in Ocala here called Mako Compressors, and it had that since the 70s. He sold out, probably 25 years ago to an English company, and got out of the compressor business. So yeah, then I just went full time into the motion picture industry and started off as like a camera assistant, worked my way up to director of photography. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing now. I specialize in underwater work and aerial work. I basically do pretty much everything except for sitting somebody in what we're doing right now, what I call a talking head interview. So people only call me for specialty stuff that is out of the ordinary, usually.
And I want to touch on that in a little bit, but I want to mention to the listeners that I live in Ocala, Florida. I've been here for 28 years, and the restaurant that I'm the general manager of a restaurant in downtown Ocala, and across the street is the Marion Theater. And the Marion Theater is this legendary, built in 1940, 1941, legendary movie theater. And they have a Walk of Fame. Think what they do in LA with the stars, but they've got the Walk of Fame. And it wasn't lost on me yesterday when I walked across the street and saw the plaque with your father's name on it. And yes. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why there's a plaque there. I mean, he is just a legend in our community.
So as you said, we moved up here in the early 80s from Miami, and he started his compressor business, and he also he was an established cinematographer, primarily underwater in South Florida, but traveled all around the world. And he did his best to bring as much film production to Marion County and Ocala as he could, more especially like Silver Springs, Rainbow Springs, because he specialized in underwater. And there'd be lots of underwater filmmakers coming here to do photography. I mean, everything from the $6 Million Man to Bionic Woman to those type of shows. And then one of my first productions that I was a cinematographer on was a Ridley Scott movie called Legend.
Yeah.
it's interesting that Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay and Ridley Scott stayed at my house because they were running low on budget, and I offered to just let them stay in our guest bedrooms. And there's a picture of us, what is now Harry's. It was O'Neill's, I think, back then, in the square in Ocala, but have all of us having dinner there and that type of thing. Anyways, back to my dad, so that was the reason why, he gained favor around Marion County, because he did his best to bring filmmaking to this area. And he would often use like the Ocala Police Department or SWAT team as stand-ins or extras, because they all knew how to scuba dive, would pay them really well for being doubles or stand-ins. Right. Promoted the surrounding area, and there, there was a lot of different productions that came here, I feel, because of him.
And so he was also, from what I was reading, he also sort of revolutionized underwater photography. Yeah. And he's credited with, coming up with some really unique and what would become sort of mainstay ways to film underwater. Is that correct?
Sure is. So he's also a mechanical engineer by trade and was a World War II combat veteran. He wasn't necessarily filming it during the war, but slightly after the war, he started the first dive shop in Miami, which is pretty incredible when you think about it, because of how many there are now. And everybody told him he's crazy. Nobody's going to pay you to take him out in a boat and go out, snorkeling or scuba diving. And because scuba diving was such a new thing back then. So he had classes where he'd teach people how to scuba dive. And then he even had classes where he taught people how to film underwater or take pictures. And he developed an underwater camera they sold for $19.95 in Woolworth's department store. And he sold like 25,000 of them. I've got a couple I could send you some pictures of, but It's called the Mako Shark. And his company was always Mako something, because that was his trademark. So it was back in those days, there was no such thing as like a still camera that you can just buy off the shelf and go underwater with it. So that was pretty revolutionary. And then he was contacted by Samuel Goldwyn, as in MGM Samuel Goldwyn, and said, hey, we want to make this movie called Around the World Under the Sea. And we don't have a way to put a camera in the water, underwater, because there's a lot of it is going to be filmed underwater, obviously. We see that there's just a story in Life magazine about you and being a mechanical engineer and have this first dive shop in Miami Beach. And would you consider building a camera, a water housing that we can take our big Mitchell, which the Mitchell Rackover camera back then, film camera, weighed about 400 pounds.
Jeez.
They wanted him to build a water housing for this Mitchell Rackover camera. And so he says, I'm going to send my son down there, Sam Goldwyn Jr., who is about the same age as my dad. And because these cameras are extremely valuable, I think there's only like 15. And back then, I think they're worth like $100,000, which was a tremendous amount of money back then. So anyways, Sam Goldwyn, I think, took a train, is what my dad said, with this camera. My dad picked him up with a truck, and they brought it over, and he took measurements off of it. And I guess Sam stayed there for about a week. And then the deal was he was going to build a camera housing, water housing for this. And then Sam was going to bring it back in a month or so and do the final fitting. And that's what they did. And they became lifelong friends during this process. Sorry about taking so long in the story, but
no, you're good.
They told him at that point, well, what do you know about photography? Sam Goldwyn Sr. said, and he's like, well, I know quite a bit about it. I my whole life. And really, he didn't know anything about it. So he's like, well, we need what's called an underwater director of photography for this movie. Would you consider doing that? And he's like, absolutely. How much does it pay? And I think there's quite a bit of money, a couple, $200-300 a day. So he was pretty stoked about that. So he went to the library, read all kinds of books about underwater cinema, or about photography, because there wasn't really underwater cinematography. And he did that movie, was a big success. And then he started getting calls for like Creature from the Black Lagoon and all of these old type movies, and then eventually like the James Bond movies. that type of thing. To continue the story, the main cameras that are used back then were what's called Aeroflex cameras. And he actually was contacted by Arnold and Richter, which is Aeroflex, and asked if he would consider building some water housings for their new cameras called the Aeroflex 2. And he did, and he says, I'll do it for free, but I want one of those cameras. Yeah. Because these things are revolutionary. They're like, the new video 4K cameras of the day, and because they're so small, they weighed like, I don't know, 15 pounds, as opposed to 400 pounds. So he built a housing and he got one of these cameras, and then he started building a bunch of these cameras for various rental houses, and he became known as like the guy to go to for underwater cinematography.
So I have a couple technical questions, and I'll do a little sidebar every once in a while. So sure. Talking about that camera that your father said, I'll build the housing, but I want one. So then my brain is immediately processing, going, okay, take me through how long you can actually film with one of these cameras before you got to do a mag change, or you got to change out the film. So how did that work back then?
All right, so that particular camera held a 400-foot magazine, and it would roughly be about 4 minutes of film, because it's about 90 feet per minute. So it wasn't really a lengthy process. A good camera assistant could switch a mag in a matter of 3-4 minutes. Okay. But the big thing is you have to take the camera out of the water, dry it all off, split it apart, take the old one off, put the new one on, make sure there's no chips or dust in it, put it back together, and then do a leak check. Water. So it wasn't necessarily the time that it took to put a new film magazine on. It's just all of the peripheral things that were involved in changing the film magazine. To this day, our running joke was producers would always become impatient because they know how long it takes on the surface. It's just a matter of taking the old one off, putting the new one on, and you're back in business. But now it's quite a process. So they're like, can't you guys change the film magazines underwater? And my dad's response was, yeah, but I'd have to do it really fast.
By comparison, before the switch to digital, in the 2000s,
yep.
How many feet of film were people able to shoot before the switch to digital, before a mag change, if you will?
Well, again, it was like 400 feet per roll.
So that never really changed by the time we get to
it. Was always, because you could also get 1,000-foot roll, which lasted closer to 10 minutes, but it was just too big, too bulky. You couldn't swim with it because it was very awkward. And mainly the 1,000-foot rolls of film were reserved for like dialogue scenes, above water. But so 400 foot is the magic number. And oddly enough, I still shoot some film, and it's making a comeback. Netflix says that their preferred acquisition format is 35 millimeter because there was a big problem a few years ago where the digital archiving got lost, and they lost some huge movies due to this. Because digital, as you know, is just ones and zeros, and after a while they get, from what I'm to dummy it down, the ones and zeros can get confused with each other, and then it corrupts the file, as we've always had problems. And so film, there's still Charlie Chaplin movies that can still be re-edited because they've kept all of the film from that movie. It's odd that things are kind of making a full circle back to film.
And that's happening because they've literally lost. They've literally lost movies.
You can Google it, but several studios have lost huge amounts of data and the original material from movies.
That's incredible. At what point do you make the realization that this is something that you're going to do full time? Because from what I read, you were kind of going in a different career path, but then you made the decision to get into this full time.
I guess when I started making a living at it and realized I was pretty good at it, like especially in the underwater and aerial fields, which is something that had not been really exploited yet. because, if you wanted to shoot underwater, you pretty much had to build your own water housing. And if you wanted to shoot in the air, you had to either become very proficient at operating a camera on what's called a Tyler mount or some other type of mount, or one that you built yourself, which is what I did. So I like the fact that it wasn't a completely exploited niche in these industries. And then because of that, I kind of became known at these particular genres in the industry and started doing really well at it. And yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Sure. But I guess my question, my follow up to that is going to be, what's the first full-time project that you start working on when you said you realize you can make a living from this and you're being hired to do different jobs, but what's the first few projects you work on, and what kind of experience was that?
The first few projects, well, I mean, again, I did everything from like work as a double for like the $6 Million Man underwater at Silver Springs when I was little. I started off in front of the camera, I guess, and then with a TV series called Treasure Seekers Beneath the Sea with Dick Clark as the host. And then I was the host. I was 10 years old at the time, and it lasted for like 2 seasons, and then various other projects. And I just kind of naturally fell into the cinematography side of it. I was like a camera assistant on the original Miami Vice TV series, and then several of the James Bond movies, and then countless commercials with my dad. And then a lot of times my dad would get double booked, and he would send me in place of him. And people would kind of look at me really strange because we have the same name. And they're like, wait a minute, you're the world-renowned underwater cinematographer that invented? And I was like 20 at the, 22. Right. And I'm like, well, you better... We call my dad about that. He goes, oh, we thought he was coming, but whatever. Okay, if you can do it, that's fine. And as far as I know, I've never let him down when he's done that. And a lot of times he wouldn't tell me that he's sending me and they're expecting him.
Right. That's great. That's great.
I had to really do some fast talking. Well, and, I call him up afterward and I'm like, Dad, how could you tell these people that they're thinking it was you? And now that I show up and they're like, it'll be fine. So
I've got you pulled up on IMDb right now.
Okay.
So I want to ask you about a few of these movies on here. I just want you to tell me what's your memory of working on any of these particular films that I name. Okay. So starting with Jaws 3D.
Yep. So Jaws 3D, I helped my dad design and build the underwater housing for that, because in those days you had to have two 35 millimeter cameras in a water housing at a roughly 45-degree angle, shooting through a prism that would allow the intermerging of both images. And it weighed about 400 pounds, this housing with the two cameras. And then I was one of the techs on that because it was so complicated. But I was still in just out of high school when that came out. So it was shot at SeaWorld. Wait a minute. Is that the one? Yeah, it was shot at SeaWorld. They built a tank on the SeaWorld property. And I couldn't believe the premise to the movie. It was supposedly a great white shark made its way from the Atlantic Ocean through a series of water pipes into the SeaWorld water ski show. I'm like, really? That's what the premise is to this? So yeah, that was, and so we spent quite a bit of time there working on that. And I was very young at the time, so I didn't do any of the shooting. I just was mainly like a camera tech /
Were you on set at all during any of the filming?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did you have any interactions with Joe Alves, the director? I know because he started as a production designer on the original Jaws and then worked his way up to being the director of the third one. And yeah. I'm just wondering if you had any interactions with him, because I've heard that was kind of a crazy shoot. Like there was a lot going on there.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of oblivious to that because I was like low man on the totem pole, so to speak. And I was in my teens. And I didn't really, I wasn't really privy to that. I would say the same thing goes with The Abyss. Early on in my career, I was a camera assistant on the movie The Abyss,
sure.
changing Cameron, but never really had any interaction with Jim. We actually shot the open ocean scenes where the submarine crashed at the beginning of the film. And so I was never really even on set. Maybe a week total I was in South Carolina on the set. But primarily we were doing the open ocean scenes with a company called Dream Quest Images that was doing the compositing work on the movie.
And The Abyss, for our younger listeners out there, is, I think, a very underrated James Cameron film. It kind of gets lost in the filmography of, the Terminator and Titanic and Avatar and all this stuff. But The Abyss is just an incredible movie. It's one of my favorite Cameron movies because of, just the underwater stuff. It's just fantastic.
Yes.
So, all right. So moving on, I have to ask about Jaws: The Revenge. Okay. And I'm going to say this, Jordy, because my girlfriend, Jess, okay, like, you can't see it in my podcast studio, but I've got Jaws memorabilia everywhere. It's my all-time favorite film. And Jaws: The Revenge, I'm 47 years old. I was 9 years old when that movie came out. It was the one and only Jaws movie that I got to see in the theater. My dad actually took my brother and I to go see it. My girlfriend, Jess, she'll make the argument that it's her favorite of the series. Now, that's a debate that will go on for eternity. But that being said, when I mentioned that you were coming on here and you had some involvement in it, she said, you have to ask him about Jaws: The Revenge. So Jaws: Revenge, famously shot in the Bahamas, from what I understand.
Another genius storyline, how the shark followed the people from Martha's Vineyard all the way to the Bahamas because it wanted to get revenge on the people. But oddly enough, I saw a recent interview with Michael Caine, the actor, one of the actors in it, and they asked him if there was ever a movie that he was embarrassed to be on. And, back in the 80s, Michael Caine it seemed like every movie out he was on. And anyways, he said Jaws: The Revenge was the only movie, which I thought was pretty funny. But no, that was a super cool movie because I was on it the whole time from start to finish. Wow. And out in the Bahamas. And I started off as a camera assistant, and then I ended up working my way up to a camera operator. Yeah, the shark, as in the first one, was breaking down quite frequently because there was no CGI back then. We were down there trying to help the effects crew work on the shark. What I thought the coolest part was they actually landed a twin-engine airplane in the water. Yeah. And they actually did that practically, like they really landed the plane right next to the barge where we were filming the shark. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And that plane is still sitting on the bottom there in front of
I'm so glad you brought that up because every time, for as much as that movie gets maligned, because a lot of people, Jaws is a masterpiece. Jaws: The Revenge, again, like you said, kind of a ridiculous premise. But there's some practical work in that movie that still puts my jaw on the floor. And that particular scene, I always ask myself, how did they shoot that? How did they film that? And to find out they really did that, I'm assuming it was a one and done shot. Like we can do this absolutely. Once.
Yep, that's right. And it was really weird, because I'm a pilot as well. Thing I thought was incredible was when the stunt pilot landed it, the engines were still running in the water and it was paddling the plane around, which I couldn't believe they were still running in the water, and then it quickly sunk, of course. Yeah. And there are several things that they did practically that would have been really difficult to do nowadays with actors and things like that. Another movie I wanted to bring up, even though you didn't ask about it, was a movie Splash.
Oh, yeah, of course. Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, Ron Howard directed. Love that movie.
I would say that was my first feature film that I worked on. Okay. It's just really, looking back at it, I think I was like 19 years old. And it was just like we were a big family, like John Candy and Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks were all staying in the same hotel room on the same floor, and we go hang out every day. And Daryl Hannah was dating the singer Jackson Browne at the time, and we'd go to what's called Blackwood Studios, and no, Island Records, I guess it would be. Blackwell, Chris Blackwell was the guy's name, and hang out there on our days off and see people like Mick Jagger and David Bowie there cutting new albums. I mean, it's just looking back at it, it's unbelievable. And my dad, we would sometimes have to fly to other islands to shoot scenes because of the topography underwater, like the reefs and things like that. And I can remember I had a plane and my dad had a plane, and like he would fly Daryl Hannah and then Tom Hanks or something, and I would fly Ron Howard, and I was like a 18, 19-year-old kid flying the direct, these huge people. First of all, you were not even supposed to be flying after you scuba dive, but that didn't have any relevance to us. I don't know if you could put that in there, but we did it anyways. And just looking back at it, how movies were shot back then, and the disregard for like any protocol, like nowadays that you'd never get away with stuff like that. That was probably one of my funnest movies. And my wife, wasn't then, but my wife now was Daryl Hannah's underwater stunt double.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
How cool is that?
That's how we, yeah.
I have to know what's going through your mind. You're describing these experiences, hanging out with John Candy, Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, the director, Jackson Brown, all this stuff. You said you're 19, 20 years old at the time. What's going through your mind on a daily basis? I mean, you're working on a major Hollywood production, which is still a beloved film 40 years later. And I'm just wondering, are you recognizing in the moment sort of, this is incredible. This is wild.
I was totally oblivious to it. I didn't know that I would ever see any of these people again, because none of them were really that famous at the time. Ron Howard, was still Opie, or was it Richie or whatever from Happy Days.
Yeah.
That was his big thing. And then I think Tom Hanks did this series called Bosom Buddies that got canceled. And, Daryl Hannah really wasn't anything. And John Candy, I guess he'd done it on Saturday night or
SCTV.
Yeah. And SCTV. Yeah. So like they were, none of them, like we would walk down the beach, go into restaurants. Nobody would recognize them. They would recognize Ron Howard, but no one else.
And that's one of the movies that really helped propel their careers too. I mean, it was a big hit from what I recall. So that's awesome. And you married Daryl Hannah's underwater stunt double.
Yes. Yep. Have 3 little mermaids now together.
That's a great story, Jordy. That's a really, really great story. So I'm looking here. I'm going through the list. I see The Abyss. Talk about Rosewood for a moment.
Oh yeah,
because Rosewood's. I rewatched that. I want to say I rewatched that maybe about a year ago. I was going through John Singleton's filmography. Obviously, living in Florida, there's a little bit of a connection there, but talk a little bit about working on Rosewood and what that experience was like.
Yeah. So that's another interesting project. I was hired as the second unit director of photography. I don't even know if I got credited or not, but like they would need what we call in the industry B-roll shots of just like the sun coming up over the marsh or birds flying, all taking off like they suddenly got scared for some reason, or an underwater shot of just fish or an alligator swimming, which we did at the springs. So once every week or so, I would come back and they would give me another shopping list of shots that I needed to get, B-roll shots. I might be like a couple hours a week on set, but other than that, I was always out doing my own thing. And I would send in they would send a film courier to me and they would bring my film that I shot that day to the lab. And then John would look at it, John Singleton would look at it and say, okay, that was great. I like that. Do this, do more of that. Maybe get this now. And so, yeah, that was I loved that because I was completely on my own. It's just me, the first and the second camera assistant. And we would just drive all over the state and get these super cool shots.
Looking back now, what would you say the most challenging film or television show was to work on? Was there ever a situation where you were just saying, this is flexing every expertise that I have?
Oh man, I should have known you were going to ask that question. And that's a good question. I'm trying to think of what what exactly would have been. They all have their own challenges. I wouldn't say there was one in particular that was more difficult than the others. Certainly that Jaws movie, Jaws, The Revenge, had an incredible amount of difficulty, not only because of the mechanical failure of the sharks, but the weather conditions. We were out in the middle of the ocean filming this, and the shark couldn't operate in anything more than a 2 or 3 foot seas, even when it was working. And then it was very difficult for us to work because we were on a work boat that would get, tossed around, and it would become unsafe at a certain point. So there was weeks on end where we would go out and just kind of take a beating and not even be able to film anything because of the weather conditions. So that was super frustrating.
Well, let me ask you this question, because I read in the making of Jaws: The Revenge that producer and director Joseph Sargent was up against what could be described as an unrealistic deadline to get the movie made and out in theaters for summer '87. And I'm wondering, did you ever feel that sense of, we're on a ticking clock, we've got to get this done?
I didn't, but I knew obviously you can't have 200 people out on the ocean every day clicking the clock and not have some regard for, hey, this has got to come to an end sooner or later. And the studio's eventually going to pull the plug, which they did. And they just made it work with what they had, because we still had quite a few scenes to shoot. And oddly enough, my wife now was also, what was her name? She was Sid Sheinberg, the president of Eileen Gray, I think is her name.
Oh, now are you talking about Sid Sheinberg's wife?
Yes,
Lorraine Gary.
Lorraine, what was it?
Lorraine Gary.
Lorraine Gary, that's right. Yeah. My wife was her stunt double in that movie.
That's awesome. Come on.
And from what I hear, rumor has it, at least on the set, they said that's the reason that movie was made, is because she wanted to be in another Jaws movie.
Yep. From what I'm told, again, this is all just.
We're not.
This is what I'm told. This is all just speculation. Is that Universal has a huge hit '85 with Back to the Future, and their '86 releases were not financially hitting the mark, and it was a combination of Sid Sheinberg, who was president Universal at the time. He was kind of figuring out what to do, and his wife said to him, "Well, I'd love to do another Jaws movie," and they're like, "Oh, well, Jaws is." Remember, this is a time before established IP. They were still making movies just because. Let's just make a movie. It's an interesting story. So he fast tracked it. I have to ask you a question. So we'll stay on Jaws: of Revenge for a moment.
Okay.
My favorite scene of the movie, obviously now, is going to be the plane landing scene, knowing that was practically done in a single take. That's incredible. But that whole underwater sequence where Michael he's in the little mini sub, and then the shark is coming after him, and they go through that entire sunken ship. Are you a part of any of that? Yes,
I was actually underwater at the time during that. And the actor that doubled the primary actor at that time, his name was Gavin McKinney. He was another local, and he actually, another super cool scene that was very dangerous is when he was trying to escape the shark, and he had to take a scuba tank off and break the nozzle off of it and go skyrocketing to the surface. That was a very dangerous stunt, because he could have gotten embolized, and had he not have been a very good diver, he could have gotten hurt badly. I don't think anybody would have tried that scene today to do that.
I've always wondered about that, because every time I watch it, I'll be the first to tell you, I've never scuba dived before. It's something I honestly want to do. It's something I'm a little nervous about because of what you just described there, because I know that there are some technical things that you have to follow no matter what. And that scene always gave me anxiety, because I always knew that you have to rise to the surface very calmly and at a very slow pace. And was that discussed? Was that talked about? Like, hey, how do
everybody knew, because Gavin was an incredible diver and waterman. And everybody knew what was going on. And basically he just had to exhale all of his air as he was coming up, because he was like 35 feet underwater, and he went skyrocketing up and then actually shot out of the water, because that tank really was propelling him. So yeah, and I can remember one of the big scenes is on that yellow sub where the shark attacked it. The shark's teeth were made out of styrofoam. Right. Every time it would do a scene and it would bite something, of course, all the teeth would break off. So you had to sit there and meticulously glue all the teeth back into the thing. But yeah, that was a very intriguing thing to shoot and very time consuming. Fortunately, everybody on that crew was just very seasoned, and everything from the filmmakers to the effects people to the divers, stunt people. I don't know that I've ever been on a shoot since then that has had so many top end professional people on the crew. Otherwise, I don't think anything would have gotten.
I have gained a new respect for the movie just talking to you, and I feel like my listeners out there are going to as well, because there is stuff that happens in this film that is done, like you said, by professionals, and you don't see that in some of these other Jaws movies. I'm telling you, that's really impressive. You said that they shut the production down and that there was more stuff to film, but they said you got to work with what you got. Mm-hmm. To the best of your memory, do you recall, was there any other set pieces that were in the script that never made it on film?
No, I think they used pretty much everything.
Okay.
There was a personal watercraft called a wet bike. It's like a motorcycle on the water. And I think there was something in the script about that the wet bike being used, and maybe that wasn't used to its full capacity. But other than that, I can't think of any additional scenes.
Did you just work in the Bahamas, or did you do anything in Martha's Vineyard when they filmed up there?
Only the Bahamas.
Only the Bahamas. And again, you did some work on Jaws 3, but what's going through your mind when you're like, I'm working full-time on Jaws the Revenge? You have to be a fan of the original film. This has to be a big deal.
To be honest with you, that never really crossed my mind. It was just basically a job, and at that time I was working quite a bit and going from one feature film to another and episodic TV series. And it's kind of like when people ask me, hey, what's it like working with so-and-so or this famous actor or that famous actor? It's basically, I know this sounds cliche, but it's your job. It's just something you don't think about there. You could be standing next to a big actor who's trying to, read his lines. Meanwhile, you're loading getting the camera ready to shoot. Meanwhile, the lighting guy and the sound guy are getting all their stuff. So everybody's there doing their job like they're supposed to. And there's no hierarchy at that moment.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Jordy, we could probably spend hours. We're just scratching the surface about everything you've worked on. I want to invite you back on the show. I'd love to continue this conversation. But I would like, before we wrap things up, I because the next time you come on, I want to talk more about the different types of photography you do, the aerial photography, the underwater photography.
Yeah, and I can also send you some clips of different things and behind the scene images that I've got from. I actually have a bunch of pictures from behind the scenes of the Jaws movies, and I actually have the original storyboard. I have the original storyboard that my dad and James Cameron wrote while James Cameron was sitting in my dad's office on, at our place on Lake Weir.
Come on. That's awesome.
James Cameron was here for a while, and they sat there and wrote the original storyboards there.
That's incredible. Well, I'm gonna just put a to be continued on our conversation, because I've really enjoyed this, and the problem with me is I'll go for 4 hours, but I know you're also sitting outside, and we're in Florida, and it's getting warm.
Started a lawnmower too.
Yeah. So Jordy, let people want to keep up with your work. What's the website? Any social media? Where can we find you?
Yeah. So Jordy.com. I had that since that's my website. Got it in like 1995 or 6, and I've been offered a ton of money for it.
I bet you have.
And so Jordy.com, and my aerial website is xcamaerials.com. Don't just type in xcam or you'll go to a totally different kind of website. But because I have sent people that and they didn't put the aerials in, and yeah. But anyways, but yeah, so xcamaerials.com and jordy.com, and then Jordy Klein on Instagram. So yeah,
that's terrific. That's terrific. And I'll go ahead and attach links to everything he just said in this episode show notes. So I invite everybody to definitely check out the site. I love that it's just jordy.com, because when you sent me your email address where it was jordy@jordy.com, I remember going, really? That's so easy. That's so perfect.
Because normally when people ask me for my email, like I can hear them scratching around for a piece of paper or something. Or they're like, okay, go ahead, I'm ready. And I tell them, and they're like, wait, that's it?
That was perfect. That is perfect. So, Jordy, we're gonna have you back soon, because I've got a ton more questions to ask you. But thank you for being on the Dana Buckler Show. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule. I really, really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right, everybody out there listening, my name is Dana Buckler, and we will talk soon.